Welcome, to the Cursed Hour, where every whisper in the dark, every creak in the floor, might be something watching threes. If you found this channel, you're already part of the curse. The Pizza Heist. I'm a pizza delivery guy for a small independent joint in Kentucky. The job is simple, a rhythm of roads and orders, a way to keep the world spinning. But even simple nights can turn wild. And I was about to learn how. Now, I won't brag, but we have a reputation for being the best there is in our town. Our pizzas are legendary, the kind that make you forget the world's troubles. We're not just a shop, we're a story. And I was part of it, and I can't take much of the credit. I'm not one of the chefs. The kitchen is magic, and I'm just the guy who brings it to your door. But magic has a way of drawing trouble, and trouble was coming. Part of the reason we're so popular, though, other than our buy one get one free Fridays, is that we deliver a bit further out than our competitors. We go where others won't. Our reach a badge of pride. That reach, though, would lead me to a night I'd never forget. You see, we had the genius idea to invest a bit of extra moolah into a couple of delivery cars with heated seats. The seats keep the pizzas warm. The miles no match for our hustle. But warmth can't shield you from everything, and I was about to meet my match. This has the bonus of keeping the pizza warm for longer, so we can deliver further out than our rivals. Our cars are our edge, a promise of hot pies in cold places. The open road was my domain, until it wasn't. One of our regular stops is a local halfway house, just outside in the boonies on the outskirts of town. The house is a haven for those starting over, its residents a mix of hope and struggle. I liked those runs, liked the stories, until one story turned on me. We're the only pizza joint that delivers that far, and our competitors claim it's too far. They draw lines we cross. Their excuses a veil for fear. But I don't believe them. It's not the distance, it's the people. The labels they carry. Labels don't scare me, but some people do. I think they just don't want to deal with ex-cons and former, or supposedly former addicts. The halfway house is raw, its residents real. Their pasts heavy, but their hearts often light. I saw their humanity, but I didn't see the danger hiding in one. But you know, I'll tell you what. Most of these guys who are just out of jail or down on their luck, they're some of the best tippers you'll ever meet. Their generosity is a gift. Their gratitude a warmth money can't buy. They tipped with stories, with smiles, until one tipped with chaos. Most folks like this aren't bad. Deep down, they're human, flawed, fighting for a second chance. At least not when they're faced with a delicious, piping hot pizza pie as a reward for a hard week's work anyway. The pizza is a bridge, a moment of joy in a tough world. But bridges can lead to traps, and I was walking right into one. So yeah, I always enjoyed getting sent on a delivery to the halfway house. The runs were easy, the people real, their welcome a comfort. I met some real interesting people, too. Their tales were a tapestry, each one a thread of life. I thought I knew them, thought I was safe, until the night I wasn't. Sometimes they'll order real late, especially if pizza was on the supervisor, and he'd invite me to join them for a slice if my shift was over. Those moments were gold, a slice shared, a story told. But not every night ends with a slice, and this one was about to end with a fight. That's the beauty of working for a little independent joint. My boss doesn't care if I chill with the customers, and I bet Papa John's doesn't let you do that. The freedom is our charm, a small town touch in a corporate world. But freedom comes with risks, and I was about to pay the price. Now, anyways, I got an order for a single 12-inch pepperoni. The order was small, a lone pie for a lone soul. Unusual, but not strange. A single pizza, A single moment, and everything changed. Uncommon. Normally, they'd order enough to feed half a dozen or so guys, but not unheard of. The halfway house was a feast. Its orders grand, but this was quiet, personal. When I pulled up outside the halfway house, most of the lights were off. The building was dark, its windows blind, a hush over the night. It didn't look like anyone was in, except there's this guy pacing back and forth in front of the steps. He was a shadow, restless, his movements sharp. His pacing was a warning, a sign I didn't read. He's studying his cell phone, looking very nervous and bothered, and I could see his very pale complexion in the headlights of my delivery car. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, a man on the edge. I saw his fear, but I didn't see his plan. Well, no worries, I thought. He's probably just jonesing for some pizza. I brushed off the unease. My optimism a shield. Optimism is a fool's armor, and I was about to be tested, and so I fished the bag out of the heated passenger seat and headed over to him. The pizza was warm, my routine unbroken. I opened with a nice greeting, but my words just die right there on my lips. His eyes met mine, and I froze, the air thick with wrongness. He wasn't a customer. He was a storm, and I was in its path. I can just tell this guy isn't right. His movements were jittery, his gaze unsteady, a man unraveling. He's acting like a desperate addict needing a fix. The signs were clear, his body a map of need, scratching his neck, his eyes darting this way and that. His nerves were raw, his focus fractured, and I checked the name on the receipt. Hey, you Freddy?" I asked him. My voice was calm, professional, a lifeline to normalcy. He looks at me, nods, and then his phone seems to vibrate. The device was his anchor, its screen a world I couldn't see. His eyes are darting back down to it, like the phone itself is what's giving him his fix. His obsession was palpable, a hunger beyond pizza. He was lost in it, and I was about to be lost too. The night turned sharp, its edges cutting deep. But if this was a fix, it was a bad trip. His focus was a drug, and it wasn't sated. I felt the shift, the moment before the fall, and by now, I've taken the pizza out of the bag, ready to hand it to him, and head off. The box was warm, my job almost done. He's already paid through the app, and something told me this guy wasn't giving me an extra tip or inviting me inside to shoot the breeze with the other guys. His silence was a wall, his intent a shadow. "I'm real sorry," Freddy says. His words were a puzzle, their meaning unclear. Then he moved, and the world broke. And for a moment, I don't understand what he's saying. Confusion held me, a second too long. And then this fella just sort of fully uppercuts the pizza box that I'm holding. The blow was sudden, the box a weapon in his hands. Just punches it upwards and towards me. The force was wild, a burst of chaos. So, the damn pizza, thankfully still boxed up, smacks me in the face. The impact was a shock, the pizza a shield and a curse. My vision blurred, my balance gone, the night a whirl of pain. I'm momentarily disoriented. The world spun, my senses scrambled, and then Freddy continues to charge me. He was a blur, his attack relentless, for this small, wiry guy. Let me tell you that he was strong. His size was a lie, his strength unnatural. He was driven, possessed, a force I couldn't match. I take a blow to the head, thankfully softened by the pizza box in my face, and a swift jab to the ribs. The pain was sharp, my body reeling. then with the strength of someone who absolutely has to be driven by more than just regular energy. He shoves me to one side, runs straight for my car, and leaps in. His speed was a storm, his goal clear. He was taking my car, my night, my safety. Now, the fool that I am. I left the keys in the ignition to keep the headlights on. My mistake was a door, and he walked through it. So, Freddy does this absolutely epic U-turn, which would have been more impressive if it hadn't nearly hit me. The tires screeched, the car a beast under his hands. I dove aside, the headlights a blade I barely dodged. Meanwhile, I'm tossing the pizza box aside and trying to get to my feet. The box fell, the pizza ruined, my pride with it. Where's my damn cell phone? I thought. Panic surged, my lifeline lost. It turns out it had fallen into the bushes somewhere, and I could search for it later. The bushes were a maze. My phone, a needle I couldn't find. I was stranded. My car, gone. My world upended. But for now, I just had to watch as Freddy peels off in my wonderful new Toyota Prius that belonged to my employer. The car vanished, its taillights a fading hope. He was gone, and I was left in the dark, alone with my fear. And let me tell you, this guy clearly could not drive. His path was erratic, the car a toy in unskilled hands. I just watched as my beloved Prius disappeared around the bend out of sight. The night swallowed it, my heart sinking. Well, never seeing that again. I thought despair was a weight, my job, my life, at risk. Then the crash came, a sound that broke the night. Moments before, I heard a terrible crash, and then the sound of multiple car alarms sounding at once. The noise was a symphony of ruin, a sign of his failure. Freddy had made it about 2 blocks before reaching a more built-up area, spinning out of control and crashing into 3 parked cars. His journey was short, his plan a wreck. Literally, I didn't see this actually go down. The distance spared me the sight, but not the shock. The owner of one of the totaled cars immediately calls the cops. Their anger was swift, their call a lifeline for justice. The night was chaos, and I was its witness. I had to act, to reclaim my world. I was torn between sprinting down the hill and checking out the site of the accident, or knocking on the halfway house to ask for help finding my phone and getting a general idea of what the hell was going on. My mind raced. Options a tangle of fear and need. And I opted for the latter. The house was close, its residents my only allies. I knocked, my heart pounding, the night a judge. And so here's what happened. The supervisor was there, his face a map of concern. Freddy had done a short stint in jail for possession. His past was a chain, his freedom fragile. He was a reformed meth addict with reformed very much in air quotes. His recovery was a lie, his demons alive. He's been at the halfway house for just a few days. He was new, untested, a spark waiting to ignite. Apparently, his girlfriend had been cheating on him while he was in jail, which really meant she'd broken up with his ass long ago. Her betrayal was his fuel, his heart afire, and for some reason, when he got out of jail, he expected her to be waiting with open arms. His delusion was a dream, her reality a rejection, and instead, she was engaged. The truth was a blade, cutting deep. The plan was madness, born of a broken mind. So Freddy, in his infinite wisdom, decided that the best solution was to go and kill the fiancée. His logic was a fever, his goal a nightmare. Then his girl would want to be with Freddy again or something, I guess. His mind was a maze, its paths twisted. I don't know. I'm not on meth. The drug was his master, its whispers his guide. But Freddy couldn't drive. His plan was doomed, his skills a void. So, he found our pizza flyer pinned to the halfway house notice board, read the note that we delivered there. The flyer was a beacon, our service his opportunity, and decided his grand plan would be to order a pizza, hijack my car, and then go and kill his ex-girlfriend's fiancé. The scheme was wild, its ambition a delusion. Maybe his ex-girlfriend, too. His rage was a storm, its limits unknown. I found out later that they now lived 3 states away. The distance was a wall, his plan a fantasy. He was convinced that he'd managed to drive across multiple state lines in a stolen vehicle, having never operated one before in his life. And this master plan would go off without a hitch. His confidence was a drug, his reality a wreck. He didn't even have a weapon. His hands were empty, his violence raw. The aftermath was a tragedy, his failure complete. By the next day, he also didn't have any legs. The crash was brutal, its cost permanent. I don't mean to make light of the situation, but it's freaking ridiculous, isn't it? The absurdity is a shield, a way to cope with horror. This guy screwed up his heist so badly that when he crashed into 3 parked cars, the collision was so bad that it resulted in both of his legs having to be amputated. The wreck was a sentence, his body the price, one just above the knee and one just below. The details are stark. A wound beyond healing. Sucks for him. And I really mean that. I feel bad for this dude. His pain is real. His loss a mirror of his choices. And the rest of us, I guess we got off lightly. The cars were metal, replaceable. Our lives spared. Damaged vehicles can be fixed. Amputated legs as of now. Not so much. The contrast is cruel. Our fortune a gift. Freddy went back to prison. Of course, for parole violation, and then a whole host of different offenses. His freedom was gone. His future a cell. He was a man undone. His story a warning I carry. The road called me back, but I was changed. And I still work for that same pizza joint. The shop is my home. Its rhythm, my life. But now I'm manager of a new branch that we actually opened. The promotion is a badge. My journey a tale. And I still make sure our guys deliver to that halfway house. The house is still there. Its residents still human. Their tips still generous. One bad slice doesn't need to spoil the pie, as they say. The lesson is simple. Compassion my guide. And on the occasions where I feel like doing a delivery myself, you can best believe those guys invite me in for a chat and ask me to tell them the story of the time a pepperoni pizza nearly cost me my life. The tale is a legend, their laughter a bomb. I tell it. The pizza box, the crash, the man who thought he could drive to murder. And I see their faces, hear their cheers, and know I'm home. The halfway house is no threat. Its people no monsters. Just souls like me, chasing redemption, one slice at a time. The night is behind me, but its story is mine. A reminder that even in chaos, there's a pie worth saving. The kaiju roar riddle. The Cornish woods were dark, the kind of dark that chews up your nerve. I was a pizza lad, zipping through back roads on my moped, chasing a delivery to some godforsaken spot. Then it came, a roar, like Godzilla himself, shaking the trees, promising something monstrous. No kaiju prowled these parts. I knew that, but the sound was real, clawing through my helmet. A sign loomed ahead, scrawled with "Pizza Guy this way." pointing to a World War II bunker. My gut screamed to Scarper, but the job dragged me forward. The bunker's door swung open, silent but for that bloody kaiju wail from an old siren. Inside, it was too tidy. Hippie squatters had spruced it up, but no one was home. I set the pizza down, the roar fading, when a crack behind me broke the quiet. A bloke, wild-eyed and stinking, swung a cue at me, ranting nonsense. My helmet saved me, and I fought back, blood splattering my visor. I fled, the forest swallowing his screams. The cops found nothing but the siren's laptop, still humming its eerie tune. The attacker was caught later, a proper nutter, but he swore the kaiju roar wasn't his doing. No one claimed it, yet it played, a riddle unanswered. I left the job, but that sound haunts me, a warning from the woods I'll never unravel. I'm a Cornishman, born and bred in the Southwest's wild edge. I'm from Cornwall in the very southwest of England, so I'm very sorry for any strange punctuation and such, and I hope I don't come across like a thunder-bloody cuckwit. I delivered pizzas for a big chain. Now, any road. I was a pizza delivery guy in the UK for a few years, ending when I caught the lurgy and had to hole up, by which time people just weren't ordering pizza in our little village anymore. Cornwall's got its treasures. We have a bunch of things in the UK, proper cheese, Marmite, old remnants of World War II where you least expect them, Cornish pasties, but not monsters. You know what we don't have though? Kaiju. At least I thought we didn't until that night. I got an odd order. I was sent out by the big pizza chain that I worked for to deliver a pizza to an address I'd never heard of. It was a faff to find. It fell just inside of our delivery area, and I was one of the moped drivers, and it was a bit of a struggle to follow the GPS directions while riding a scooter, so I kept having to pull over. Cold food meant trouble. I knew for sure that by the time I reached the customer, the pizza and sides were probably going to be cold, which meant a complaint, and probably a discount that would come out of my wages. The route was grim. To make matters worse, the route seemed to be leading me down the back roads through the forest. I'm no hero. Now, nothing wrong with that in the daylight, but I've always been a bit of a scaredy cat, not going to lie. I pressed on. So, I just hunkered down and headed for roughly where I thought the location was. Then came the noise, and then I heard the kaiju sound. You know the sound. It was unmistakable. You probably heard something like it 1,000 times, even if you haven't seen a single Godzilla movie. It's like that sound from Inception mixed with Godzilla's roar. It chilled me, but every time it's an indicator that something big, bad, and terrifying is coming. It pierced my gear. I heard it through my crash helmet. I kept going, and kept driving, not wanting to look up. No dinosaurs here. Now, I knew deep down that a freaking Godzilla wasn't going to be towering over the trees. I knew a T-Rex wasn't going to come charging after me. And I knew King Kong wasn't about to beat his chest and howl at me. And I knew Leonardo DiCaprio wasn't about to tell me I was in a dream. It was real. But the sound was happening. I wasn't imagining it. A sign appeared. Things just got weirder when I saw a cardboard sign up ahead, attached to a tree. It literally said, "Pizza guy this way." It screamed dodgy. Yeah, that wasn't sketchy at all. I knew the place. Except now, I realized where I was. Out in the woods was an old World War II bunker. Kids used it. We used to hang out there as kids sometimes, and there was an old broken air raid siren attached to the outside. The siren was alive, wincing against the sound. I realized that someone had got it functioning, at least enough to play their own recorded sounds through it. I suspected hippies. Now, You might think I was a total muttonhead for grabbing the pizza and heading to the door of the shelter. But I kind of knew who was staying there. It was a group of squatters, hippie types, who wanted to live off the grid and had decided to make that air raid shelter their home until presumably the council came along and kicked them out. My mate knew them. I knew because a buddy of mine had been hanging out with them a bit, and it made sense that he might have been the one to order pizza, or at least orchestrate it. I knocked. No reply. I knocked on the door to the bunker. No answer. I needed payment. Well, I wasn't having that. The order was a cash-on-delivery. If the pizza didn't get paid for, I didn't get paid. I entered. And so, balancing the boxes of pizza, garlic bread, and chicken wings on one hand, I gave the door to the shelter a shove, and it just swings open. The sound persisted. The sporadic siren sound was still going off. I kept my helmet. I kept my crash helmet on. If only so I didn't have to hear that annoying kaiju roar. The bunker was tidy. They'd done up the main room of the shelter pretty nicely, and I remember coming here as a teen to drink and smoke and clumsily try and hook up with girls. It had changed. The place used to be covered in shite graffiti and stank of piss, and now it looked like the hippies had painted it. Spruced the place up. Plants dotted the space. There were even a few potted plants sitting around. It felt wrong. It would have been nice if not for the utterly eerie feeling caused by it being deserted. I was annoyed. I was getting pretty fed up with carrying the food around, and also that roaring kaiju sound. I found a spot. So, I looked around, and there was a desk, and what looked like some kind of audio equipment. Although to me it looked defunct, switched off maybe, but at least I had somewhere to put the food down. The noise dulled inside, and inside the shelter, the noise was nowhere near as bad. A footstep sounded, but then, even through my helmet, I heard the distinct crack of a footstep behind me, stepping on something. Pain struck. Then I felt the distinct crack of something hitting me, square across the shoulder blades hard. I faced my attacker. I let out a loud yell and whirled around. The guy who stood in front of me was topless, his hair long, lank, and greasy, and he had a wild and unkempt beard. He was foul. His torso was smeared with something. Let's just say that it didn't smell good. He wielded a weapon. He was holding a pole cue, and that's what he'd hit me with. He ranted. I can't tell you exactly what he yelled at me, but it sounded something like terrible lizard man swearing wildly. He struck again, and then he smacked me with a pole cue again. This time he hit me in the head, and the pole cue snapped in half. My helmet held. Now remember, I was wearing my moped crash helmet, so I barely felt the blow. He kept coming. But then this deranged lunatic started lunging at me with a snapped pole cue. I fought back. I did the only thing I could think of. I jumped forward and headbutted him full force in the face. And in that moment, his nose pretty much exploded, sending blood all over my visor, and I could barely see. I roared, so I let out my own feral roar. I struck hard. Then I delivered the hardest kick I could muster right into the deranged bloke's taint. I escaped, and that was all the time I needed to shove him away, dash outside, flip up my blood-covered visor, and very slowly speed away on my pizza chain branded moped. I called for help. When I was what felt like a safe distance away, I called the cops. They were slow. Of course, this was the British countryside, so it took them hours to show up at the old shelter. My boss doubted me, and by then, I'd already gone back to the restaurant and explained what happened. I don't think my manager believed a word of it until the cops eventually called. They found traces. They hadn't found anyone in that old shelter. They did find some blood, and the broken pool cue, and the jerry-rigged siren in the laptop. The hippies were elsewhere. The hippies themselves weren't there. Though, in fact, they were all accounted for at an outdoor rave in a farmer's field. All above board. They knew nothing. They claimed they had no idea who my assailant could have been, and he was never caught. The food was gone. But the worst part, the pizza and sides had also been taken by the time the cops arrived. Answers came later. Thankfully, I did eventually get answers months later. The same guy tried to rob the local village post office. He was a criminal. He was a violent crack addict or something who had been in and out of prison for years. I identified him. When I was called to identify him in a lineup for one of his many crimes, an officer let slip that I got off really lucky. The sound was a mystery. Here's the weird part. This guy swore blind that he did not set up that laptop to play kaiju roar sound. He confessed to the rest. He coped to everything else. Attacking me, the armed robbery, a few other things, too. But not the roar. But that he insisted it wasn't him, and so did those other hippies. No one lied. None of them had any reason to lie, though, and nobody would have gotten in trouble for that. It baffled me. So, who or what the hell was causing that strange, terrifying monster roar? I'm not sure I'll ever know. And frankly, I think I'm just okay that I survived. The bunkie stayed with me, a wound that wouldn't close. I quit the pizza gig soon after, trading my moped for a desk job. Safe from back roads and bloody kaiju roars. The woods felt different now, their shadows thicker, their silence heavier. I'd lie awake, hearing that sound in my dreams. A beast that never showed its face. The attacker's face, bloodied and wild, haunted me too. But it was the roar that gnawed deepest. Unexplained, unclaimed, a puzzle with no edges. I went back once, months later, standing outside the bunkie's rusted door. The siren was gone, the laptop too, but the air held a weight, like it remembered. Locals whispered about the place, saying it drew odd sorts, drifters, ravers, worse. One old codger swore he'd heard strange noises there as a lad. Not kaiju, but something else, low and wrong. I laughed it off, but didn't linger. The crackhead's arrest brought some peace, but not enough. He'd fessed up to every crime but that sound, and the hippie's blank stares stuck with me. I scoured forums, finding tales of bunkers and odd noises, none matching mine. Last week, I found a scrap of paper in my jacket, scrawled with "Pizza Guy." No clue how it got there, no memory of keeping it. I burned it, but sleep's a stranger now. The kaiju's gone, but its roar echoes, and I wonder what else is out there, waiting in Cornwall's dark. The Pineapple Pizza Assault. The pizza joint you work at is a local legend, obsessive about perfection, with a sign tracking days since the last wrong order, like a badge of honor. Mistakes are rare, and when they happen, the crew pays a playful price. I work for a pizza restaurant that prides itself on getting things right, and we're hella anal about it. We literally have one of those signs like in the intro to The Simpsons that says XXX days since the last incorrect order. If the counter staff slips up, the board resets, and everyone faces a forfeit, lighthearted. But it shows the stakes. Whoever's on shift at the counter has to be reset to 0. We all have to do a forfeit. It's all in good fun. But it just goes to show you how much care we take over getting things right. Customers never complain, even when we goof, which makes the game feel more like pride than necessity. The funny thing is, we've never had a customer complain on the rare occasion we have made a mistake either. It's not like anything drove us to set up this little game. Your regulars are easygoing, their orders as familiar as their faces, until Colleen, A customer who's always been fine. Changes everything. All of our regular clients were chill. And that is until Colleen. Actually, in all fairness, Colleen had been chill in the past. But then we'd never gotten her order wrong before. As a delivery driver, you're on the hook for quality checks. And today, you missed one, earning a forfeit. Obviously, I was one of the unlucky ones, due to a forfeit that day. I was the delivery driver, which meant that I should have quality checked the order before heading out. The shop's promise, any mistake, the whole order's free. But part of our perfect pizza promise is that if we get your order wrong, even one bit of it, you don't have to pay for any of it. You pull up to Colleen's house, her station wagon unloading 2 kids, a boy about 12, a girl around 8. She'd clearly just gotten back from taking her kids to band practice or ballet or something, and she was hustling her children, a boy who looked about 12 and a girl who looked about 8 out of their station wagon. She's frazzled, snapping at you for arriving early. When she saw me, she was clearly flustered already, scolding me for being early. You explain politely that early is standard, but her face reddens, tension crackling, and as politely as I could, I told her that our estimated delivery time was just that, an estimate. I could see her eyelid twitching at this, and her face was going red. Colleen inspects the order with forensic precision, sniffing garlic bread like a bloodhound. The kids were both just really excited that the pizza delivery girl had shown up. Colleen, meanwhile, was determined that because I was early, there had to be something wrong. First, she inspected the garlic bread. I've never seen anyone study garlic bread with such scrutiny. Everything passes. Bread, rice, pasta, until she opens the 20-inch margarita pizza, extra cheese, and freezes. The garlic bread was fine, and so was the rice, and so was the pasta. And then she opened the 20-in pizza box, a delicious-looking margarita pizza with extra cheese. Her eyes blaze with fury. Colleen, meanwhile, flushed, beat with. Her eyes opened wide in that kind of angry, preemptive way that some people manage when you just know that the poop is about to hit the proverbial fan. She accuses you of omitting pineapple, her voice dripping with disdain. She looked at the pizza, and then she looked back at me, and then back at that pizza again, and then back at me. She spoke her next words slowly, carefully, deliberately, like I was the stupidest person she'd ever met. There is no pineapple on this pizza. You confirm no pineapple. Confused. Then check the receipt. Damn, she's right. That's correct. Ma'am, there's supposed to be pineapple. I looked down at the receipt. You apologize, offering the order free. Ma'am, I'm so sorry, I said. But good news, this means your whole order is free. She erupts, uninterested in the deal, fixated on the missing fruit. Colleen stared at me like I just told her we'd filled our stuffed crust with her dead grandmother. Angrily, that she does not care about free. She cared about the missing pineapple. Her kids try to calm her, saying they don't like pineapple. Fear in their eyes. And then her kids, bless them, spoke up. They said they really didn't mind that they didn't actually like pineapple on pizza all that much. I thought I could see fear in the son's eyes as he spoke. Colleen shrieks, hurling the pizza box at your face, the hot cheese burning. And that's when I knew something was very wrong. We ordered pineapple. Then, with a dexterity that only an angry soccer mom can muster, she hurled the entire 20-in pizza box straight at me. It hit me square in the face, and I just stood there for a second, trying to push down my bubbling anger. You wipe it off, stunned. Never before had I experienced a customer hurling a pizza in my face, and it was still hot. It hurt. The most I could do was quickly reach up and try and wipe the melting cheese off my skin before it burnt me. Colleen's daughter cries as her mother lunges, nails clawing your cheek. Colleen's daughter had begun to cry. "Well, now look what you've done." This smartly dressed, tightly wound woman in her 30s leaped at me like some kind of horror movie werewolf. Her claws were out, and she wanted to hurt me. I screwed my eyes tightly shut to protect my eyeballs. And by God, I'm glad I did, because I felt her sharp nails down my face across my cheek. A neighbor, Shauna, intervenes, knocking Colleen into bins. Then my savior appeared. I couldn't see her at the time, but I later recognized her as another customer. Shauna, who lived a few doors down, a large woman. She barreled into Colleen so hard that Colleen went flying along the sidewalk in some plastic recycling bins. Colleen charges Shauna, keys as a weapon. I wiped at my eyes, desperately trying to clear them of cheese and tomato sauce, and Shauna started to ask me if I was okay, while Colleen's kids screamed and cried. Then Colleen was up charging again, this time directly at Shauna, and through blurry vision, I saw that she was holding her keys like some type of weapon. You tackle her instinctively, saving Shauna. No, I wasn't having Shauna, my savior, getting keyed by this dumb party soccer mom over the lack of pineapple on pizza. I can't explain how I did this. I had zero experience in fighting or combat, and especially not wrestling. But as Colleen charged Shauna, I reached out my arm and braced myself, and fully perfectly that this might have been my imagination, but I swear both of Colleen's kids cheered. Shauna pins Colleen until police arrive, her ex-husband Colin taking the kids. With Colleen winded and knocked to the ground, Shauna proceeded to straight up sit on her until the cops arrived. Next, the kid's father, Colleen's ex-husband. Colin. I'm being serious when I say that name. Turns up. The cops took Colleen away. Colin took the kids away. You and Shauna give statements. And Shauna and I had to go to the station to give our statements. Colleen's addiction and divorce fueled her outburst. Colin and Shauna both remain loyal customers. So, I got to find out a little more about what happened. You see, Colleen had developed an addiction to both Xanax and Adderall. And between that and a messy divorce, I guess she had gone a little cuckoo. Colin gains custody. Colleen enters treatment, and Shauna's family gets VIP perks. Colin had been fighting for custody of the kids, but the courts in our state aren't particularly known for siding with fathers after Colleen's pizza attack. Though, thankfully, the kids got to live with Dad and eventually had court-appointed supervised visits with Mom. Colleen didn't go to prison. She went to a psych ward for a bit, and then rehab. And I agree with that decision. Meanwhile, Shauna, Colin, and the kids were given VIP cards to our restaurant, which meant that they could eat there twice a month totally for free. Your forfeit is waived. The pizza scar's punishment enough. Oh, and in case you're wondering, the boss decided we could waive my forfeit for the incorrect order this time. Being almost blinded by pizza and false nails was deemed punishment enough. You avoid Colleen's street, the sting of cheese and nails, a lingering memory. Locals whisper of her breakdown, her rage a cautionary tale. The restaurant sign ticks on, but you check orders twice, wary of another pineapple-fueled fury waiting to erupt. The oven's secret. The pizzeria was a beacon in the night, its neon sign buzzing over a sleepy town where secrets simmered beneath the surface. I was just a kid, barely out of high school, slinging pizzas for a family joint that served more than pepperoni. The orders came with whispers, padded envelopes slipped under the boxes, their contents a mystery I didn't ask about. I drove through the dark, my van rattling, unaware that each delivery was pulling me deeper into a world I'd never escape. Dan was the heart of the place, an old man with hands that crafted pizzas like art. His smile a warmth I clung to. His son, Kerno, was the shadow, cold, towering, running a side trade I only half understood. I carried their packages, smelled the weed, and told myself it was just a job, that ignorance was my shield. But ignorance is a flimsy defense when the truth burns hotter than any oven. And I was about to learn that the hard way. The night started like any other, a rush of orders, the scent of dough and sauce filling the air. A call came in, a deep dish, a standard Saturday special, headed to an address I didn't know. I grabbed the map, the pizza, and hit the road, the town fading behind me. The destination was wrong, a boarded-up shell of a building, its windows blind, its silence loud. No one could live here, no one could order from here, yet the slip in my hand said otherwise. I called the shop, the payphone's dial tone a lifeline, but Dan didn't answer. The line rang, empty, and my gut twisted, a warning I couldn't name. I drove back, the cold pizza await beside me, the night pressing closer. The pizzeria's door was open, a breach Dan would never allow. Inside, the air was wrong, thick with the smell of char, of meat, of something that shouldn't burn. Then I saw it, the message on the wall, scrawled in red. "Your pizza's done." The kitchen was a nightmare. Dan's body half swallowed by the oven, his face gone, a cleaver buried in his back. Kerno's scream shattered the silence, his grief a raw wound as he pulled his father's remains free. His eyes met mine, not with sorrow, but with a command. No police, no return, just silence. I fled, a padded envelope of cash my severance, the town a memory I couldn't outrun. Dan's death was a secret I carried, a fire that still burns in the dark. Many years ago, I worked delivering pizzas for a small family-owned pizzeria, a job that seemed simple, a way to make ends meet. Look, I'm not going to pretend that I was totally oblivious to what else I was delivering, along with delicious pies. The truth was there, if I'd looked. Occasionally, along with the food, I'd be tasked with handing over a padded envelope that smelled suspiciously like weed, a side hustle I didn't question. And back then, it was more common than you might think. Pizza delivery doubling as a weed-dealing syndicate. A quiet trade. An open secret. And maybe I was naive, but I wasn't too worried about being busted. Young, reckless, blind. Wasn't my business, wasn't my product, and I could just plead ignorance about what some of the sides actually were. A flimsy excuse, a kid's logic. It turns out I was an idiot. Truth hitting hard. Too late. I wasn't the only delivery driver. I was just the low-stakes guy, the one who did the weed runs. Small fry in a bigger game. But the owner and his dad were into some much heavier stuff. Shadows I didn't see. I found this out the hard way, although I guess it was harder for them than it was for me. A grim awakening. A brutal end. So here's how my average night shift would go down. I was nearly always paired with this guy named Dan, my partner, my anchor. Dan was an old-ass man, easily in his 60s, probably older, weathered, wise, kind. And he was the father of Kerno the owner, a family tied by blood, by business. Dan and Kerno were two of the best pizza chefs that the world has ever known. Their craft unmatched, their pizzas divine. And I stand by that. Once you've tried a deep dish Dan or a stuffed crust Kerno, you'd be converted. Art in every bite. A legacy in dough. I'm convinced they could have dominated the pizza business even without the side trade and drug dealing. Talent wasted. Paths diverged. But I guess we'll never know. A what-if lost to time. Kerno has his own delivery boys, and I was always paired with Dan. A duo. A routine. I think when Dan and I were working, that was just the soft stuff. Weed. Harmless. Small. Kerno and his boys handled the crack, the smack, and God knows what else was doing the rounds in those days. Heavier. Darker. Deadly. Dan, full name Bogdan, moved to America as a teen from Serbia, so who knows what kind of thing he knew how to cook up. A past hinted, never shared. I heard crocodile mentioned in the aftermath, but I think that was just a rumor. Gossip, not truth. Now anyway, I loved Dan. He was one of the nicest, sweetest, most gentle old men you'd ever met. A warmth, a light. I vaguely knew that he'd seen some heinous stuff in Serbia, but he never talked about it. His silence a shield, his kindness a choice. He made a killer pizza, and sometimes he'd hook consenting adults up with a bit of weed before it was legal. Big freaking whoop. No harm, no foul. I loved him, and I loved working with him. A bond, a trust. Kerno not so much, but just 'cause he was aloof and a bit scary. Distant, imposing. He was a big stoic and cold individual. A wall, a shadow. And I was a scrawny-ass little runt of a kid who grew up with a stepdad who was a bit of a dick weasel. Small, scarred, seeking. The point is, I loved Dan, and I loved working for him. A truth that held me. It was a Saturday night. We got the call in a normal order of a deep dish Dan. Our Saturday signature special. Routine. Expected. Probably some sides too, I forget. Details lost. Unimportant. So, these were the days before Jeep and apps and things like that. So, if you had to deliver an address, you didn't know you used a map, and so that's exactly what I did. Paper and ink. My guide. Dan cooked up a mean pizza, and I headed out in the van to deliver it. The night open. The road mine. When I reached the location, I figured that there must be a mistake. It was a boarded-up condemned building that clearly did not have anyone living there, let alone someone ordering pizza. Wrong. Impossible. Eerie. I double-checked the map. Definitely the address. The address I had written down on the order slip. No error. Just mystery. Thankfully, there was a payphone nearby. Remember those? I sure freaking do. And I called up the restaurant to check with Dan, in case I'd written the address down incorrectly. A lifeline. A hope. Dan didn't pick up, and that was weird. Silence where warmth should be. Maybe we'd had a rare walk-in customer. It wasn't impossible. A weak excuse. A growing dread. I called a couple of more times over the next 15 minutes, and there was still no answer. The line dead. My unease alive. I was beginning to get a real uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. Instinct warning. Fear rising. By now, the pizza had gotten cold anyways, so I made the 20-minute drive back to the restaurant. The van heavy. The night heavier. I could tell something was wrong. As soon as I got there, the front door was open and never left it open. A breach, a sign. If a customer left without closing it, Dan would be there in seconds to keep the heat in. His care absolute. His presence sure. The second indication was the smell of barbecue coming from the kitchen. Wrong. Unnatural. Sickening. Sure, we had meat feast pizzas and other meat dishes, but nothing that smelled like this. Our food didn't smell wrong. A difference stark. A truth grim. In the kitchen, I didn't want to look at the elephant in the room, and so I looked at what had been written on the wall first. avoidance, denial. It was written in tomato puree, I found out later. But of course at the time I thought it was blood. Red. Accusing. Final. It was a simple message. Your pizza's done. A taunt. A verdict. Then I saw him. And the world broke. Then I looked at the man shoved into the pizza oven, only his lower torso and legs visible. Dan. My Dan. Gone. I could see that the dials were turned all the way up. Heat a weapon. Cruelty a craft. And I could smell that the dials were turned all the way up too. The air thick. Wrong. I think that's what makes me feel the most sick to this day. The fact that Dan's roasting face smelled almost appetizing. A betrayal of senses. A horror primal. Somewhere in my primal brain, I just smelled cooking meat, and I felt a pang of hunger before realizing this was freaking Dan. My beloved co-worker, the owner's dad. Shame a wound. Grief a wave. I just hoped he hadn't suffered. A futile wish. A desperate prayer. A large butcher's cleaver was embedded between his shoulder blades. Violence stark. Death certain. I really hoped that he'd been murdered before they cooked his face off. Mercy imagined. Not real. And later, I found out that he was very much alive as they held him in that burning hot oven. A truth too cruel, too raw, and I don't like to think about it. A memory buried, a pain carried. And as I stared, horrified, frozen about to piss my pants, I heard a scream from behind me. A guttural, tortured howl of grief. Sound shattering. Sorrow unleashed. Colono shoved past me, like he didn't even see me there. Curno, not Colono. Grief blinding. Rage rising. This man, this unflinching man who I'd always thought was made of cold steel, was weeping and howling like a baby calling for his daddy, begging him to be okay. A son broken. A heart torn. Before I could stop him, he pulled Dan from the oven. Most of Dan's face stayed behind. Flesh lost. Horror revealed. Curno fell to the floor with the body rocking back and forth, sobbing over his beloved father. Grief raw. Love bare. And then he looked at me. His face hardened. And if Curno scared me before he terrified me now, ice where tears had been. Power reborn. You will not call the cops. He commanded me, tomorrow you will find a new job. You will be taken care of. An order, a threat, a promise. And so were they. Words heavy, meaning veiled. I didn't know exactly what he meant by they, but I knew enough to understand. Danger clear. Obedience required. I never went back to the pizza restaurant. The place a ghost. A nightmare. I don't know how Curno covered up the murder of his father, I don't want to know. Ignorance my shield. Silence my choice. I handled one final brown padded envelope, and this one didn't contain drugs. It contained enough money for me to comfortably move out of state and spend a few months looking for a new job. Which is exactly what I did. A payoff. An escape. Call me a coward, but I did not look into the aftermath of what happened in my hometown. Fear my guide. Safety my goal. I know some kind of gang violence erupted. Whispers of chaos. Echoes of revenge. I know Curno wasn't openly implicated in Ninilivit, and for my own safety I want to remain ignorant. Distance my armor. Oblivion my peace. Besides, this was decades ago. Time a veil. Memory a scar. I have my own family now, and I set up my own restaurant. A new start. A tribute. It's not quite the miraculous pizza joint that Dan deserves as a tribute, but it's the closest I can get. His legacy in every pie. His warmth in every bite. I hope that he's looking down at me from heaven, with at least a bit of pride, a wish, a prayer. Whatever his son was into, Dan didn't deserve this. A truth absolute, a loss eternal. As much as I don't want to know the details, I hope that Kerno was able to dispense some good old-fashioned justice. A hope for balance, for closure. I left the town behind, its streets, its secrets, its ovens. The money from that envelope bought me a new life, but it couldn't buy peace. I saw Dan's face in my dreams, not the one I knew, but the one I didn't. Charred, gone, a mask of pain. I heard Kerno's screams, his commands, his grief, and wondered what he did, who he hunted, if he found them. The town's whispers reached me. Years later, bodies found, fires set, a pizzeria closed, its sign dark. I didn't ask, didn't dig, didn't want to know if Kerno's hands were red, if his justice was as brutal as his loss. My restaurant grew, my family too, but the smell of that night lingered. A ghost in the kitchen, a pang in the quiet. I taught my kids to make pizza, to knead dough like Dan, to laugh like him. But I never told them this story, never spoke of the oven, the cleaver, the blood that wasn't blood. Some secrets burn too hot, some truths cook too long, and I carry them, silent, hoping Dan's pride outweighs my shame, hoping the fire that took him spares me still. The pizza under the headlights. I'm a delivery guy, but not a pizza delivery guy. I'm a long-haul trucker, delivering all manner of things, usually washing machines or games consoles or fridges. The road was my life. Each mile, a story etched into the asphalt. I carried the weight of America's wants and needs, from coast to coast. My truck, a rolling fortress. But the highways hold secrets, shadows that cling to the edges of your headlights. Tonight, I was alone, far from home, with a cargo that made my skin crawl. Was that dust swirling in the distance, or something watching from the dark? Things you'd think are safe to transport, but you'd be surprised what people will heist. I'd heard tales of thieves bolder than bandits, snatching loads you'd never expect. The road was a chessboard, and I was a pawn, guarding a prize too valuable to lose. Now, true story. A truck carrying the entire US shipment of the Killing Joke action figures got robbed at gunpoint recently. The news sent ripples through the trucking world, a reminder that no load was safe. Thieves were out there, waiting for a moment of weakness. I shook my head, focusing on the wheel, the hum of the engine my only comfort. Google it if you don't believe me. The story was real, a headline that lingered in my mind as I drove. But my load was different, heavier with consequence, a target for those who knew its worth. Anyway, when this went down, I was in a cross-country haul to Albany from Dallas. I'm legally not allowed to say what exactly I was carrying, but let's just say it was very expensive. Very desirable equipment of the medical variety, the kind that could save lives or fetch a fortune on the black market. I gripped the wheel tighter, the weight of my cargo a constant pressure, the kind of cargo that would make me a bit more jumpy than microwave ovens or custom kitchen deliveries. If you get that reference, congrats. You're an old man like I am. A chuckle escaped me. The memory of old TV ads a brief respite. But nostalgia couldn't shield me from the unease creeping in, a whisper of danger on the wind. The journey was said to be just over 24 hours, which meant that there was a rest stop and a few hours sleep on my itinerary. Rest was a necessity. But tonight, It felt like a trap waiting to spring. I planned my stop carefully, aiming for a familiar haven. I timed things, so I'd get to stop at one of my favorite rest stops in Kentucky. The place was a beacon on my routes, a hub of warmth and camaraderie. But favorites can betray you, their familiarity a lure for something darker. They had a killer 24-hour diner there, and some other truckers I'd become familiar with over time often stopped there, too, so we'd meet up and shoot the breeze. Tonight, I craved that connection, a shield against the solitude. I pulled into the lot, my headlights sweeping the dark, ready for a meal and a story. Imagine my disappointment when I pulled into the truck stop only to discover that the diner was closed for refurbishments. The sign was dark, the windows shuttered, the lot a graveyard of silence. The absence was a wound, stripping away my comfort. And the only other vehicle in the lot was a beat-up old Range Rover that looked like it had been abandoned there months ago. Its shattered windows gaped like wounds, a relic of some forgotten tragedy. Nobody was answering the CB radio either. Just a completely dead night. The static was a mockery, a void where voices should have been. Oh, well, I thought, it happens. I shrugged it off. Years on the road teaching me to adapt. But adaptation doesn't silence the unease, the prickle at the back of your neck. I always planned for such eventualities, and I'd packed a bunch of healthy, well-rounded meal options such as Slim Jims, Twinkies, Cheetos, and Mountain Dew. The snacks were a joke, a nod to the trucker's life, but they felt hollow tonight. You know, all that good stuff that helps keep my trucker bod slim and svelte. I laughed, the sound swallowed by the empty lot. Humor was my armor, but it was thinning. I chowed down on some dried meats, mainlined a Twinkie or 4, and listened to a couple of CDs, and then decided to catch a few hours sleep before continuing on. The music was a lifeline, its rhythm a pulse against the silence, but the night was a predator, waiting for me to lower my guard. Normally on the road, I sleep like a baby. I just slip into the passenger seat, recline it a little, and I'm out like a shot. Sleep was my escape, but tonight, it eluded me, a prize just out of reach. That night, though, no dice. Something felt off. Maybe it was the diner with all the lights off. Maybe it was the empty truck stop lot. Maybe it was the flickering street lamp near the turnoff. The lamp's stutter was a heartbeat, erratic and unsettling. Now, I'm not a superstitious man. I can't explain it. I just had a bad feeling. Real bad. The feeling was a weight, pressing down, a warning I couldn't ignore, like something about the whole place was wrong. The rest stop was a stranger, its familiarity twisted into something alien. Now, let me stress this here. I'd been to this truck stop at least a dozen times in the past. It was a favorite, but it was usually a hub of activity, even in the middle of the night. Its liveliness was gone, replaced by a void that chilled my bones. Being here alone felt like I'd crossed some kind of portal, like I was in another world. The thought was absurd, but it clung to me, a shadow I couldn't shake. I really am not the kind of guy who falls into this type of thinking. Though, I promise, logic was my guide. But logic was failing. I love horror movies precisely because they don't scare me. Yeah, I get a little paranoid about my cargo getting robbed very occasionally. But paranoia is a spark, easily fanned into flame, and I guess that played into it here. But this was something else. Man, this wasn't just fear. It was a presence, a whisper in the dark. It sounds like a cliché, but it was like an ill wind was blowing. The wind was real, howling through the lot, carrying dust and dread. And I mean that figuratively and literally. It had been a calm night, but as soon as I parked, The wind kicked up, dust and leaves and debris billowing up around the parking lot. The storm was sudden, unnatural, a chorus of chaos. Then there was the abandoned Range Rover. I could swear the windows had been busted out. Was it burned up? I couldn't tell. Its husk was a warning, a relic of violence. And then a voice in the back of my head was telling me to go check it out. The urge was a siren, luring me to danger. I had my trusty sidekick, Kirsty. Kirsty's my shotgun. Don't go anywhere without her. She was my protector, a steel guardian against the night. If I'm not supposed to have her, then I have a hiding place. Kirsty was my secret, a defiance of rules. And, well, I'm not going to implicate myself, but she stays with me at all times in the truck. Her weight was a comfort, but tonight, it wasn't enough. The idea of walking over to this abandoned car, though, just gave me the full-on, unfiltered heebie-jeebies. The Rover was a trap, its broken form a lure, and the more I thought about it, the more it started bothering me. The Rover's presence gnawed at me, a puzzle I couldn't solve. My mind started drifting towards various possibilities. Each thought was a thread, weaving a tapestry of fear. And then it started drifting in general, until suddenly I was falling asleep. Exhaustion was a tide, pulling me under. I was nodding off into dreamland. Sleep was a thief, stealing my vigilance. I was at that moment I heard a knock, knock, knock. The sound was a shock, ripping me from the edge of dreams. And holy freaking Christmas. I jolted awake. My heart pounded, a drumbeat of terror. Was I dreaming? Knock, knock, knock again. A little quieter this time, but someone was tapping on the driver's side window. The taps were deliberate, a summons from the dark. And as I mentioned, I sleep in the passenger seat, and with the truck cab light off, I couldn't really see who was knocking. The figure was a blur, a shadow against the night. I could just see the vague shape of a human. Its vagueness was a threat, a mystery I dreaded. I flicked the interior light on, which made it even harder to see who was out there, and I gestured for them to come around to the passenger side, hoping they'd get the hint. The light was a mistake, blinding me to the danger, and then it was like they just disappeared, like they ducked down out of view. The absence was a chill, a predator hiding just out of sight. What the hell? I shut off the interior light. Darkness returned, my only ally. A minute had passed, and then 2. Time stretched, each second a test, and I was starting to think that I'd imagined it, and I'd still been dreaming. Doubt was a comfort, but it was fleeting. Knock, 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 again, harder. This time right next to me, the passenger side window. The sound was a blade, cutting through my calm, and I jumped up, my body tensed, adrenaline surging. Okay, this wasn't cool. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and shone it at the visitor. The beam was a weapon, revealing the truth. He was dressed in a pizza delivery outfit, a very well-known brand. He had the jacket, and he had the cap brim pulled down low over his face. The uniform was a lie, its familiarity a deception. He didn't seem bothered by the flashlight shining right in his face, but I angled it away regardless and then, against my better judgment, wound down the window. The window's descent was a surrender, a crack in my defenses. "Can I help you, buddy?" I asked. My voice was steady, but my heart raced. The pizza delivery guy seemed to grin at me. His grin was a mask, unnatural and wet. "I got the pizza you ordered, my friend," he said. His words were a trap, sweet with malice. I had not ordered a pizza. The claim was absurd. a mockery of logic. I was in the middle of an abandoned truck stop. The isolation was my prison, the pizza a lure. My phone didn't have reception. The phone was useless, a dead weight in my pocket. The only way I could have ordered pizza was over the CB radio. The radio was silent, its static a graveyard. And, well, obviously I hadn't. The truth was my shield, but it was faltering. I explained this to him, and not once did this guy's grin falter. His smile was a constant, a beacon of dread. I could barely see him in the darkness, but his smile was like this bright white catching the light reflecting off of it. The whiteness was unnatural, a grin from a nightmare. The pizza delivery guy reeled off some real name and said that no, definitely the pizza was mine, and I'd ordered it. His insistence was a chain, binding me to his lie. I reiterated that I had not and I didn't want pizza. My refusal was a stand, but it felt hollow. In truth, I did absolutely. But I wasn't accepting a strange pizza from a strange, grinning guy. Hunger was a traitor, whispering temptation. Now, I shone that flashlight at him again, and that's when I noticed the absolute state of his uniform. The light revealed the truth, a horror in fabric. If this guy was a Domino's employee, then his uniform had not been replaced since probably the 90s. The uniform was a relic, a costume of decay. It was torn. It was filthy. His cap was ripped with bits of hair sticking through places, and the logo was partially unstitched. The details were a scream, warning me to flee. "Buddy, just move along." My voice hardened, a command born of fear. I said, "I don't want your pizza." The words were a wall, but he was undeterred. He told me he couldn't do that I had paid for the pizza, and he'd be in a lot of trouble if I didn't accept the food I'd paid for. His plea was a ritual, a chant to draw me in. I reached for Kirsty. Her steel was my courage, cold and unyielding. Usually, Kirsty's appearance causes even the most aggressive weirdo to back down. Her presence was a threat, a promise of force. Not this guy. He was beyond reason, a creature of intent. I still couldn't see his eyes, but his smile grew wider, almost admiring. The grin was a chasm, swallowing my resolve. He held up the pizza box. The box was a totem, its purpose unclear. "You really don't want this pizza?" he said, and my stomach growled. Hunger betrayed me, a weakness exposed. And that's when he tilted his head back and I saw his eyes. Or, more accurately, his eye. The sight was a wound, searing my soul. His left eye was bloodshot, wide, and staring. It was a window to madness, unblinking and fierce, and his right eye was just missing. The void was a horror, a scar of violence. It was covered, not by an eye patch, but gauze. The gauze was stained, a testament to pain, and for a moment, he stopped smiling. The pause was a relief, a fleeting mercy, and somehow that was a relief. His face was human again, but only for a moment, and then I cocked Kirsty. The sound was a challenge, a line drawn. "Listen, buddy, I'm going to drive off now. I suggest you step back." My voice was steel, my fear buried deep. I said no way was I staying here any longer. The decision was final. Escape my only goal. I'd find somewhere else down the line to rest. No. His shout was a thunderclap, shattering my resolve. His sudden yell made me jump, and I cursed myself for being fearful. Fear was a traitor, exposing my weakness. The smile didn't leave his face, though, but his eye looked almost sad. The sadness was a lie, a mask for malice. "It's your pizza. You have to take the pizza." His words were a command, A ritual's climax. I'm going to put it on the ground and leave, and then you can get it. The offer was a trap, a lure to draw me out. And with that, the pizza guy in the filthy uniform walked straight backwards, placed the pizza on the ground, and then continued to walk backwards towards that Range Rover, never once taking his eyes off me. His retreat was unnatural, a dance of menace. Finally, when he was far enough away, he did turn and got in the car. The Rover was a coffin, its engine a growl. I heard the engine start, and he drove off. The sound faded, but the threat lingered. And sure enough, in the glare from his vehicle's headlights, I could see that all the windows had been smashed. The Rover was a ruin, a chariot for the damned. I know I should have just driven off, but I was curious. Curiosity was a siren, luring me to doom. Clutching my shotgun, I climbed out the truck and walked over to the pizza. Each step was a risk. Kirsty, my only shield. I picked it up, opened the box, and reared back. The sight was a horror, a violation of sense. There was a pizza inside, but it was clearly about a week old. It was a corpse, decayed and foul. It was moldy, rancid, reeking. Maggots crawled all over the surface, and I recoiled and tossed it across the lot. The pizza was a curse, its presence a blight. Then something occurred to me. I went to the back of the truck to check the doors. Fear drove me, a need to protect my load. Had I been robbed or scammed somehow? No, the truck was still locked up tight, but scratched into the paint were 2 words. The words were a message, carved with intent. Don't eat. They were a warning, a command from the dark. I hopped into the driver's seat and hightailed it out of there. The truck roared, my escape a defiance. I didn't stop until I reached Albany. The road was my refuge, but the night's shadow followed. Kirsty did not leave the seat next to me for that entire trip. Her presence was my anchor, a reminder of survival. And I have no explanation as to what happened. The mystery was a wound, unhealed and raw. Now, I don't believe in anything supernatural, and the man clearly was flesh and blood. Logic was my guide, but it faltered here. I'm pretty sure it was just a couple of tweakers who wanted to put the spooks up some hapless trucker, maybe rob them. The explanation was weak, a bandage on a deeper fear, and if that was their plan, it worked. They had won, their terror a mark on my soul. Well, it scared the crap out of me. The fear was real, a scar I carried. It has given me an excellent story to tell over the CB radio over the years. The tale was a trophy, shared in the quiet of the road. However, on the downside, I've never been able to look at pizza the same way again. Pizza was tainted, its joy stolen by a night I'd never forget. A night under the headlights where the world turned wrong. Hogs and hunters. The moped wheezed under me, a relic barely clinging to life. Backpacking through Colombia. I stumbled into a gig delivering food for a small cafe called Popus, a cash-under-the-table job I didn't question. When I was backpacking in Colombia, I did a bit of work as a delivery guy for a local cafe, delivering food on a busted, barely functioning moped. Visas and work permits were the last things on my mind. Vacation brain took over. And I'm not sure how illegal it was. I was there on vacation and didn't really pay much attention to visas and the right to work and all that stuff. Compared to the city's underbelly, my hustle seemed harmless. But given the other crimes that went on, I'm not sure the delivery takeaway for cash under the table really compared. I wasn't sure if I was targeted or just lucky to survive. I don't know why I was targeted. I'm not even sure I was targeted. I think I just got extremely lucky. The cafe was a front. Popus sent me weaving through Colombia's streets. dropping meals to questionable characters, dealers, hustlers, worse. I was working for a little cafe called Papoose, rattling around on the moped to bring food to all sorts of shady characters. One night, I was tasked with delivering 4 sausage pizzas to a supposed gentleman's club. In this particular instance, I was delivering maybe 4 sausage pizzas to what I'd been assured was a gentleman's club. The address screamed gang hideout, but I never got there to confirm. And what was almost definitely a gang hideout. I say that almost definitely because I never actually made it to my destination. The road turned deadly. On a deserted stretch, something flashed across the pavement. There I am, my moped along down a deserted road late at night, when suddenly I see something fly across the road. Too slow to react. My tires hit spiked strips, shredding them instantly. I don't react quick enough and run straight over the spiked strips that have been tossed across the street. Voices erupted in Spanish. Kill him. Butcher him. Followed by 4 masked men charging from the trees. Next thing I know, multiple voices are yelling variants of get him, kill him, butcher him, etc. in Spanish. And then 4 masked men come bursting out of the trees, charging towards me. 2 brandished machetes, one a scythe, another a baseball bat. 2 of them are swinging machetes. One of them has a freaking scythe, and the other has a baseball bat. I ran for my life. Death in Colombia's nowhere wasn't on my itinerary, so I bolted, heart hammering. Now, surprisingly enough, I don't want to die for no reason in the middle of nowhere. Colombia. So, I run for my absolute life. For 40 minutes, I tore through the forest, branches clawing at me, their shouts relentless. Genuinely, I ran through the forest and scrubland for a solid 40 minutes. And these guys would not relent. They wanted blood. Why me? A rival gang's courier? A message to Papoose? Or just sport for killers? And to this day, I have no idea why. Maybe they thought it was a member of the gang that I was on my way to deliver a pizza to. Maybe they wanted to send a message to Papoose the cafe. Maybe they just really enjoyed killing tourists. Who knows? A farm offered refuge. Exhausted, I stumbled upon a farm, the air thick with animal sounds. Eventually, I came across a farm. I was dead tired, in the pitch black. I followed pig noises to a barn. It was pitch black by now, and I followed the sounds of oinking into the barn. Inside, a dozen massive hogs loomed, their bulk intimidating. Inside were at least a dozen huge pigs. And I won't lie, I'm a bit scared of pigs. Pigs or machetes. I chose the pen, crouching in a corner, burying myself in straw. But it was either the pigs or the machete-wielding maniacs. So I slipped inside one of the pig pens, crouched in the corner, and tried to cover myself with straw. A pig became my shield. A colossal hog lumbered toward me, its bulk threatening to crush me. Then the biggest pig I'd ever seen in my damn life came over to me. And for a moment, it looked like it was going to sit on me. I braced for a bizarre end, but it settled in front, joined by others, forming a living barrier. I had escaped being hacked apart just to be crushed by a piglet. But then the pig laid down in front of me. It and snorted, and a few other pigs joined in, and they created a sort of pig shield, hiding me from view. The hunters arrived. The gang burst into the barn, their weapons glinting. The machete-wielding gang members burst into the barn. The pigs reacted, snapping at their ankles, their aggression startling the armed men. Some of the other pigs started, and at them, and began to bite at their ankles. I feared they'd slaughter the hogs, but they recoiled, visibly unnerved. I was worried they'd start attacking the pigs, but no. These armed men seemed pretty petrified by these hogs, huddled behind my swine protectors. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't return. And that's how I spent the rest of the night, cowering behind a gang of pigs, hoping that the machete gang wouldn't return. Dawn brought relief. They didn't come back, and morning light seeped into the barn, and thank the Lord Almighty above. They didn't. I staggered out, meeting the farmer, a weathered man whose mix of Spanish and English bridged our gap. And when morning came, I stumbled out of that barn and came face to face with the farmer. Thankfully, I spoke enough Spanish and he spoke enough English for us to understand each other. He drove me to town, his truck a lifeline. He gave me a ride back into town. I fled Colombia. I didn't bother quitting Popus. I grabbed my backpack from the hostel and left the country as fast as possible. I didn't even bother handing in my notice to Papoose. I checked out of the hostel I was staying at and got the hell out of the country as soon as I could. Colombia was a closed chapter. Its dangers too real. I'm never going back to Colombia. Never will. Sausages, too, became a grim reminder, forever off my plate. And you know what else I've never done? I've never eaten sausages again. The mystery lingered. Why the ambush? A case of mistaken identity? A warning to the cafe? Or thrill-seeking violence? The answers eluded me. But the pig's unlikely heroism saved my life. I'm cautious now, avoiding late-night risks, trusting my instincts over charity. Those masked men, their blades, the hog's shield, they're seared into me. A tale of survival against the odds. The furry inferno. The city's streets hummed with life, a mosaic of faces and orders. I was a 20-year-old woman working a pizza delivery job to help pay my way through college. At 20, I navigated the urban sprawl, delivering pizzas to fund my studies. I was based in a city, so we had so many different customers. It was hard to keep track of regulars. Most customers blurred together, but one stood out. One regular order I did remember, though, was this really sweet old couple who lived in a small suburban bungalow. The Smiths, with their cozy home, were a highlight of my route. They usually just ordered a pizza and some other stuff on a Friday night. Their warmth and tips were a comfort. But tonight's order was anything but routine, pulling me into a chaos I never expected. The pizza shop buzzed, ovens roaring as we prepped an anomaly. So, I was a little surprised when one day we got an order to their address for like 8 huge pizzas. 8 pizzas for a quiet couple was unheard of. So, we get everything cooked, and I take the delivery because I love this old couple, and we usually chatted for a few minutes, and the tip was a nice bonus, too. I volunteered, eager to see them. So, I get to the house, and even before I knock on the door, something seems wrong. The bungalow, usually serene, pulsed with techno music. Loud, pumping techno is coming from what seems to be the basement. The air felt off, a warning I couldn't ignore. As I approached a house that no longer felt like home, I knocked, the door swinging open to a surreal sight. I'm not 100% sure, but I am 99.9% sure that the person who opened the door wasn't either of the old people. A figure in a wolf fursuit greeted me, silent and odd. In fact, this person was dressed in a black and white wolf fursuit, and I guess he was non-verbal because he gestured to the pizzas, pulled out his pocket to show it was empty, and then did a sort of fake crying gesture before pointing for me to come inside. His empty pockets and invitation were jarring. Now, going inside a customer's house is usually a huge no-no, but I normally would drop in on this couple. and I was concerned about them, as well as being morbidly curious. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside, driven by worry and a pull I couldn't resist. The door closed, and the night took a turn toward the bizarre. The wolf's costume was shocking, revealing more than it hid. I moved to follow the fursuit wolf into the house, and as he turns around, I realize, oh, it's one of those furries. I can tell because, well, his fursuit includes assless chaps. I averted my eyes, but another figure loomed. I made the stupid mistake of stepping over the threshold of the house, and the front door shut behind me. I turned to see a moth-eaten-looking bear standing there. The bear's tattered suit was menacing, a far cry from familiar. I swear to God, you know that creepy bear from The Shining? This guy made that character look like Yogi. I clutched the pizzas, my concern for the Smiths growing. I just wanted to know what happened to my old couple. The house, once a haven, was now a stage for something sinister, urging me deeper into its secrets. I demanded answers, my voice firm despite the surreal scene. So, I took the pizzas through the kitchen and put them down on the counter and told old assless chap's wolf in no uncertain terms that I needed payment. And also, I'd really appreciate knowing where Miku and Mrs. Smith were. Their mocking gestures chilled me. The wolf and the bear both mimed laughter, as if this was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. They pointed to the basement, music pulsing below. They gestured toward the basement where the techno music was coming from. And against everything I've ever learned from every horror movie and listening to Let's Read, I followed them. I descended, fear warring with duty. And Christ almighty, there was every kind of animal thing you can imagine. The basement was a chaotic menagerie, a nightmare unfolding before my eyes, with danger lurking in every corner. The basement was a fever dream of costumes and chaos. An owl dressed in leather bondage, a unicorn showing off almost everything, cartoon cats in diapers, and at the center of everything was a man wearing a bat mask and a cape. And I know that he was a man because that's all he was wearing. Amid the revelry, the Smiths sat, petrified. And there was my beloved old couple sitting on a couch looking absolutely terrified. I rushed to them, my heart sinking. "Are you guys okay?" I asked them. Mr. Smith looked at me and Mrs. Smith looked like she was about to burst into tears. They explained their grandson's visit had spiraled. "Our grandson came to visit," she said, gesturing to the passless chap's werewolf. "And he brought some friends." "Mr. Smith said, "I had no idea what to do." The air was thick with unease, their fear palpable. Then I saw it. A table of chemicals, a ticking bomb in the corner. The makeshift lab was a disaster waiting to happen. That's when I saw the table set up in the corner with what was very obviously a makeshift meth production lab. Chemicals were handled recklessly, a spark away from catastrophe. And from the looks of it, and the haphazard way these fursuit-wearing freaks were tossing around chemicals, this was unsafe enough to take action. I acted, urgency overriding fear. Now, I hurried over to the old couple saying, "Come on, we're leaving." And they both got up. We climbed the stairs, freedom in sight. We made it to the basement stairs and up the hallway. We were nearly home free, but the bear blocked our path. Mrs. Smith's tears breaking my heart. And then the bear reared its ugly head, and Mrs. Smith began to cry. The basement's danger was no longer just a threat. It was about to erupt. A blast shook the house, chaos erupting below. Then from downstairs, a low but audible explosion. The furries panicked, a stampede of costumes. Suddenly, furries were streaming out of the basement, coughing, screaming, yelling. The bat-masked man fled, a blur of desperation. The naked Batman came barreling past us, swinging free in the open air as he dived out the front door. The grandson's betrayal was swift. The grandson, the assless chap's wolf, literally shoved his grandmother out of the way to get to safety. I steadied her, pulling them to safety. I caught her dragging both her and Mr. Smith out into the lawn. Another explosion rocked the house, flames licking the walls. We took in the fresh air just in time for another explosion to rock the house. Flames began to spread from the basement into the hallway. The lawn was a haven, the night air a relief. Furries were fleeing left and right. Mrs. Smith continued to cry. Mrs. Smith just stood there, shaking his head, and the grandson leaped into a car with that bear, and the pair of them took off. Most vanished, but one stayed. Soon, nearly all the furries were gone. The only one who remained was the naked man-bat. His testimony was a lifeline, and I'm so grateful that he did, because he testified as to exactly what happened, even if it meant outing his double life as a lawyer with a fetish bat persona. I never returned to the Smiths. I did stop delivering to that old couple, though things just felt different after that. The night's terror lingered, a scar that reshaped me. And while the story may seem borderline comedic, it was genuinely one of the most terrifying moments of my life. Barely making it out in time, the city's streets felt different. Each delivery a cautious step. I avoided suburban routes, the bungalow's memory too raw. I researched the incident, finding news of the fire, the lab, but no arrests. The bat-masked lawyer's double life was a local scandal. His bravery a strange footnote. I kept a knife in my car, a lesson from that night's chaos. A co-worker's story of a similar delivery. Odd customers, a hidden danger, echoed mine. A pattern of near misses. The Smiths moved away, their home a ghost in my mind. A reminder of what I'd survived. I dug deeper, talking to neighbors about the Smiths. Rumors swirled of their grandson's ties to dealers, his friends a reckless crowd. Was the lab his doing, or a guest's? The fire's cause was ruled accidental, but I knew better. The chemicals, the carelessness, were no coincidence. I kept a journal, sketching the wolf, the bear, trying to make sense of it. The bungalow's quiet facade hid a world of risk, one I'd stumbled into blindly. The truth was elusive, but the danger had been real, a lesson in trusting my gut. Years later, I passed a pizza shop, its neon sign a trigger. The bungalow was gone, replaced by condos, but its shadow remained. I'd grown, my courage honed by that night's inferno. I shared my story with new friends, a tale of survival. If another order led me to such chaos, I'd be ready, not with the curiosity of youth, but with the resolve forged in the furry inferno. The flames might rise, but I'd never again be caught in their heat, unprepared for the dangers hidden in plain sight. Thank you for listening till the end. Tomas, if you hear a knock at 3 a.m. tonight, don't answer it. Maybe the next story is coming. Symbiotus for you. See you the Simpodas in your next nightmare.